very dangerous ideological direction.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has inaugurated the most far-right government in the country's history.
Recently re-elected and now the head of a new far-right government.
Controversial plans to overhaul the justice system.
Netanyahu started pursuing a dramatic overhaul of Israel's judicial system that would weaken the court's power over the executive branch.
It was a sudden outpouring of rage.
Protests erupted across Israel.
Bibi is not here for the democracy. Thank you very much.
We see hundreds of thousands of Israelis in the streets, which is pretty amazing for a country of just 10 million people. And they are there week after week after week protesting Netanyahu's efforts, which they see as a threat to democracy. They see it as a power grab by the prime minister.
He's facing trial for 3 different counts of corruption. And for him, it was a life or death moment. He needed to change Israel's legal system so he could somehow stop the trial.
That led to, I would say, the biggest wave of protest in the history of the country, and probably the most severe political crisis and social crisis in the history of the country. Looking at this now, after October 7, that seems like a sweet dream for Israelis. But back then, it was the country being on the brink of civil war.
Inside Netanyahu's government, intelligence officials worried that the political unrest was leaving the country vulnerable to its enemies.
In many meetings, the chiefs of Israeli intelligence warned Netanyahu that the political crisis and its effect on the military are perceived by Israeli enemy as the time to take more aggressive initiative against Israel.
There were actually quite a lot of warnings saying, look, we're creating here the perfect storm. And at one point or another, one of our enemies would use that to start a war because they would feel that we're weak and that we're consumed with our own domestic political problems.
But those protesting say that this is escalating into an existential battle for Israel.
In Washington, President Biden watched the situation with alarm and urged Netanyahu to reverse course.
They cannot continue down this road. And I've sort of made that clear. Hopefully the Prime Minister will act in a way that he can try to work out some genuine compromise, but that remains to be seen.
The president's meeting with Crown Prince Mohammed bin...
For Biden, the unrest in Israel threatened to disrupt a plan he'd been nurturing to take the Abraham Accords to the next level in the Middle East. He and Netanyahu had been quietly courting Saudi Arabia.
They did push and try to expand on the Abraham Accords, in particular with a vision of Israeli-Saudi normalization that would offer a dramatically different vision of the Middle East, and one that would fit in well to their vision of creating alliances, in particular in competition with China and Russia.
By late September 2023, at the UN General Assembly in New York, a deal was taking shape. Netanyahu met with Biden for the first time since forming his far-right government.
There's a lot of anticipation leading up to this meeting. You see the friendly version of Biden and Bibi, right? You see the bon ami, you see the collegiality. Here we've been friends for decades, and yes, we can disagree, but on the important stuff, we're on the same page. And it's an important moment.
Biden used the meeting to discuss how to bring the Palestinians into the deal.
When he sat down with Prime Minister Netanyahu, the main topic of that meeting, which lasted almost 2 hours, was about the Palestinians and how they fit into the Saudi deal. Now, I'll say Gaza was not a part of that process, and that's because Hamas is in charge of Gaza.
Prime Minister of the State of Israel, I invite him to address the Assembly.
Less than 3 weeks before the October 7th attacks, Netanyahu would make a fateful speech.
He said, we are going to have peace with Saudi Arabia, and the Palestinians should not have a veto on that.
I've long sought to make peace with the Palestinians, but I also believe that we must not give the Palestinians a veto over new peace treaties with Arab states.
Which is, in a different language, from my point of view, the Palestinians can sorry, but excuse my French.
Now, for years, my approach to peace was rejected by the so-called experts. Well, they were wrong. Peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia will truly create a new Middle East.
The leaders of Hamas, as they explain to us, they see this and they understand that in a moment, the Palestinian issue will be completely taken off the world agenda. Now, they came to the conclusion, a jihadist conclusion, of blood, of murder, of massacre. They wanted regional war.
There's an Israel before October 7th, and there is an Israel after October 7th. The barbarity, the hate, the raping, the burning, the killing of children, the ruthlessness, those atrocities are second only to what the Jews met in the Holocaust. After October 7th, every single Israeli I know is asking themselves one question. Is this a place where I can have a tomorrow? Is this a place where I can live?
Israel is at war. We didn't want this war. It was forced upon us in the most brutal and savage way.
Hamas had carried out the deadliest single assault in Israel's history, and it had happened on Benjamin Netanyahu's watch.
He saw himself as the greatest protector of the state of Israel and persuaded himself and his supporters that Israel was safe and that he could handle everything.
Hamas will understand that by attacking us, they've made a mistake of historic proportions.
He would manage the Palestinian conflict without attempting to solve it. He would keep Hamas as an enemy entity, but a weak one. The problem, of course, is that he refused to accept the fact that actually some of his actions were pushing Hamas in the worst direction possible.
Israel will win this war. And when Israel wins, the entire civilized world wins.